My guests today are Michael Hornsby, the Customer Success Director at Salesforce, and Mia Jordan, an Industry Advisor also with Salesforce. Michael, Mia, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion today. The Office of Management and Budget has recent update to Circular A11, commonly known as the Budget Planning Guidance for fiscal 2026, expands and updates the agency requirements for customer experience. Section 280, if you're keeping score at home, which I know most of us are, addresses everything from high-impact service providers to understanding how the Paperwork Reduction Act, the dreaded PRA, can impact your ability to measure customer experience. Now, included in the CX section is one interesting line from OMB. Basically, they say employee experience should be an overarching component of CX. Now, OMB doesn't offer much other details about what that actually means or how agencies should go about this. But what we do know since 2018, as OMB first included CX in Circular A11, agencies have quickly come around to grasp this basic equation of good customer experience plus good employee experience equals high quality total experience. Now, with the emergence of better tools, improved data management, agencies are well positioned to accelerate the impact and success of how they deliver services to all their customers. So how can they continue to make progress? Well, that's why you guys are here. So let's start, Mia. There's one thing about the employee experience, as OMB kindly put out, it should be an overarching piece to your total experience, your customer experience. Without a lot of details from our friends at OMB, not to pick on them, one of the big issues of employee experience is this whole life cycle. Hey, I've just been hired, I'm about to retire. Talk a little bit about why this is an emerging concept about customer experience and employee experience.
Because what it comes down to is culture, right? The hire to retire experience. Ultimately, when you bring someone new into the agency, whether they're transferring from another government organization or brand new to government, the experience that they have going through the process of the application to onboarding and then their first 90 to 120 days really sets the stage for how the employee feels about the organization that they're working with. The retirement process also is, rife with a lot of, I think, unknowns, a little bit disjointed. And so helping employees properly plan for retirement, I think, is a necessary evil that also has to be looked at in terms of how do we make this simple, and then how do we make this something that employees aren't kind of scratching their heads waiting 90 to 100 days after they retire to figure out what's actually going to happen? How much am I actually going to get paid? But when you think about just that process, you do have to kind of pan out, and look more holistically at the agency. So while you fix that aspect, normally the customer experience is based on the lack of tools that employees in the agency have in order to deliver a superior or first class or world class service.
I think there's another aspect that's interesting too when you zoom back and think about, does an agency really even know what a customer experience should be, right? Do they even understand that it's really building a relationship with their customers, right? Building on the brand. Why are they coming to the agency? What are they going to get serviced by that agency? Or what does that agency intend to do for them? And so leaders have to create this journey, and they have to understand the journey, and they have to put the customer at the center of that journey. So when you're designing your services, when you're designing the way that you share information, when you're designing the apps that you bring into an agency, if the customer isn't at the center of that conversation, understanding the wants, the needs, the desires of that customer, that constituent, right, in this case, agencies are going to get it wrong, and they're not going to provide the right experiences overall for their customers.
True.
We're going to just go back to something that Mia was talking about, because I think it built on to Michael's piece, is that if your first 90 to 100 days, it's not a good experience. Oh, it took me so long to get a laptop. I'm still waiting on my security clearance. I've been coming to work for a week and I've read the paper, right? Like that's not a good experience, and that translates into your experience, which is the customer at the center. If I'm not at the center of this initial experience, how can I put the outward customer, the citizen at the center? That's, I think, what you're getting to, that the building of the culture, getting people in the right mindset to deliver customer experience and to the external folks.
No doubt. I mean, I want to contrast my experience with government versus my first 120 days at Salesforce. There is an experience, that journey that was built for new hires. It tells you the first 30 days what your tasks are, to include training, to include, the signing of your paperwork, your W-2s, and all those things. And so what it really did was set me up for success. That I understood that the company knew exactly what they needed from me, but also what they expected of me and what I should expect of them. And that's essentially what I think government is trying to figure out how to get right, which is how do they set the stage for a positive experience for an employee, but most I think importantly is how do we integrate them into this culture, right, that we call whatever agency, that will make them productive on day one.
Yeah, and obviously there's some challenges with onboarding in federal agencies. I had a very similar experience. It was the polar opposite of what you just described. But
Same.
I think another piece of this is leaders listening to the people that are at the center of this experience, right? So if it's staff, you're listening to staff. What does staff expect? Build your services around what staff expects. But you have to be, I think, vulnerable enough as a leader, and you have to be really focused enough on the vision that you're trying to create in order for that sort of to come together, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to go out and create the vision on your own. You can listen to people and figure out what they expect of you.
Absolutely.
That's something we're seeing more of, the focus on, for instance, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. I think
Right.
a lot more agencies are putting a lot more stock into those results. And then OPM is doing more with those results to dig deeper. Hey, it's not just top-level agency, it's this bureau. It's not just this bureau, it's this office within the bureau. It's not this office in the bureau, but this small group of people. Are you seeing, Michael, leaders coming to you at Salesforce or just more willing to say, hey, we found employee engagement, or we found this issue through the survey and we want to address it? What's that conversation's been like?
So I'm working with a young leader now in an agency that is like the poster child for leaders. And so some of the stuff that he's doing is he brings people together and he has conversations with them and he listens to what they're talking about and he examines their process and he assigns people to update that process. Like, imagine that. He uses like scaled collaborative tools in order to have conversations that then bubble up and then are shared like broadly across the enterprise. So I think that part of it, what he's trying to do is it's not just listening to people, but it's also allowing for collaboration, allowing for conversations to happen, allowing for process to be developed in the field and then bubble up that then becomes policy around the agency. So I think, some of it like goes back to just being a curious leader, right? And understanding that you don't have to have all the answers, but if you don't ask questions, you will not get any answers from anybody, right? And you won't be able to really affect like macro change in your agency. Right. So yeah, there are people in the field that are doing stuff. Unfortunately, I think sometimes the work becomes so difficult and so taxing that people can't step back sometimes and do that listening.
That's an important point. Because while you may have vision, the listening is really important because your vision may totally not align. But more importantly, I think the piece that I think we don't, or even being in government and then now working with government leaders, that we don't spend enough time on is challenging the status quo, challenging what the process is today and does it even make sense? Because what you end up learning when you kind of uncover or take the hood off of the business process that's in place is that it's folklore. Well, Nancy did it this way for 20 years and Nancy trained 10 people. And so now those 10 people all do it that way without challenging. Why do we do this? Because this makes the lives of our customers difficult.
Yeah, and so just kind of building on that point, one of the things that I see with this leader that I was just mentioning was that not only is he building this sort of culture of like creativity and listening, but he has trust. And he's developed trust in his agency. And so when I see that, we are also developing trust with him. And so if I need to challenge him, it's a collaborative conversation. Yeah. It's not me challenging him because I think that he's wrong. It's challenging because I think I can help him. And he listens to me because he's that type of leader. So, yeah.
Good point.
So one of the reasons why we know, to Mia's point of, hey, we always did it this way, is because one, they believe it works.
Yes.
And two, there's a risk aversion of all federal employees and a lot of companies. I mean, we love to blame the federal employees, but I'm sure at Salesforce you see some risk aversion too.
We do.
It's not perfect anywhere. But we all want to move faster. But
Exactly.
to going back to your story, and Michael, maybe you can expand upon it, is failure an option? Because I think I'll give you just a 2-second story. I wrote a story once it was a GSA 18F person. I said, failure is an option. And he came back to me and said, I love that headline. That was the best headline I've ever read. And I was like, oh. But do you feel like it's okay to fail?
Absolutely.
Not a big way, but.
No, but you have to take some risks and some challenges. And so one of my successes, I won't go into the details, was based on a 4-year failure. And so I failed for 4 years and I figured out how to get it right. And the solution that we implement was really good. But this leader in particular is now experimenting with things that are pushing his agency. So he wants to experiment with AI. And the federal government all wants to do AI. They say AI in every sentence. Commercial companies do
Thank
too.
you. 'Cause I was going to call you out on that.
No, they do too. And no one really has an understanding of what they want to accomplish. He's got a couple of use cases that are interesting. He's going to experiment and he's going to figure it out and he's going to iterate. And so absolutely, failure is an option. That's the only way you learn.
That's right.
Mia, same question for you, because I think when we talk about that risk aversion, changing the employee experience is also scary. Well, what if I change it and it doesn't come out right? Or, hey, you and I, we don't like change, right? We want change to happen, but not to us.
Sure.
How do agencies start to address that employee time to hire, whatever the issue is, and still kind of keep folks comfortable to a certain extent? I mean, they have to get out of their comfort zone as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say something that's going to sound very cliche, but I think it's true. It is that whole notion of people, process, and technology. And, if you can get the people and the process right, and really identify, like, what are the outcomes that we want to achieve by challenging how we do this today, then the technology implementation, wherever it is that you need to accelerate the hiring process. If you know that, hey, we have these bottlenecks here because this organization doesn't talk to that organization. And oh, by the way, this employee experience issue that the government has is not and should not rest solely on the shoulders of the HR leaders. It is an organizational problem. And I probably hopefully when you air this, people will be cheering in the background because I've said that, especially the Chicos in government. But there are so many different functional areas that are a part of the hiring process that if you don't get those leaders all in the room to say, we need to do something better, and you're only focusing on HR and its processes, then I think you've missed the boat.
Another piece of that is that typically the conversation starts with the hammer, with the tools.
Sure.
Right?
Always.
And if you start with the tool, you're going to get it wrong most of the time.
Yeah.
Like, you rarely get it right because you're not starting with problems, you're not starting with solutions, you're not starting with your vision.
I think that's a really key, is that too much of this is put on the HR world. And I've talked to several Chicos over the years, and they go, listen, our technology is old, our processes aren't that bad, but it's also getting hiring managers to do their job, and that can be difficult too.
Yes.
I think that's a good spot for a quick break. We'll come back, we'll continue our conversation and dig deeper into some of the customer experience and some of those tools that Michael mentioned. First, we'll take a quick break. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Michael Hornsby, the Customer Success Director at Salesforce, and Mia Jordan, an Industry Advisor also with Salesforce. Before break, we were talking a lot about this idea of the employee experience. Obviously, the other side of the coin is customer experience and the outside, the external side. And I think what a lot of agencies have been doing and continue to do is trying to say, what does that look like? How can we improve it? We know there's the high impact service providers, HISPs have a lot of goals around that. So Michael, let me start with you. When you're talking to agencies, when you're talking to customers, what's the discussion around that CX journey? How are they asking? What questions should they be asking, or are they asking? What are you starting to see about them trying to say, how do we take this and really improve?
So one thing I think that we don't really do is we don't start the conversation in the right place. And so for me, the conversation starts with outcomes, like desired outcomes. What are you trying to achieve? Let's really be clear about that. I think that's a challenge for some leaders because they kind of want to do the thing. I want to replace this tool, or I want to replace this platform, or I want to have a new HR department that I'm going to build up, or whatever it is. But they don't think about the outcome. So the outcome for me is always, or the conversation for me around outcomes is always, so tell me the one or two things that you need to do to actually change what you're currently doing to make it better for the people that you serve, right? Like it becomes complicated, but it's also very intentional in the way that I talk to them. And so once we can settle on what their desired outcome is, that's then what we build the CX journey around. And I'll use an example from my past. We had this, an agency that I used to work at. I was working really closely with the director of the visitor's office, and her goal was to create a new experience for people coming to the White House. And she wanted that experience to be special from the inception, right? So not just you get to do this tour, but from the time you get to the gates, everything has been a new experience for you. So what she did was she was on a trip and she came back and she said, I want to create this boarding pass. And I want to create a boarding pass because I want people to have something special that they can sort of have as a keepsake. The reason that this story sort of goes back to the CX journey is because we could have said, well, customers don't know when they're supposed to show up. They don't have an email, blah, 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 blah. But what we did was we created an experience. They got this special thing. They got to share it with friends and family. It solved a bunch of our tech problems in terms of sharing information. But it was like part of a journey that we sort of didn't even really think of in that way when we started the conversation. It created an entire experience before people showed up to the gates. And so to me, that's what I try to challenge leaders to do. What is the thing that you want people to feel, experience? What are their needs? What are their wants? What are their desires when they interact with you as an agency or as an organization? And once you can answer those questions and really articulate that, then we can start building a journey. If you just say, hey, I want to do a new CX journey, I'm going to challenge you, and we're going to start from the beginning.
I love everything that you said, and so I want to reflect back on my days as a CIO, where more often than not, the systems, the legacy systems, 10, 15, 20 years old, were mostly, and those that were public facing, were mostly designed around like how the program office, right, needed to get their work done. Not, was very little focus on exactly like, does this person engaging with a customer even understand this language, or are you asking them to input the same information multiple times on different pieces of paper? And to Michael's point, if you take a paper application and you say, if we threw this application away today, tell me, what is it that you want your customer to experience? As a part of that, there are some principles, though, that I would love to see. I know we mentioned OMB earlier. I would love to see OMB actually lay out or codify in some of their language, like this notion of making it easy for your customer, 3 steps to apply, kind of, that be the requirement. Things like, I only have to put my information in one time, because if you already know me, then maybe when I put in certain information, it automatically pulls up my information that I engaged with you before, and I'm able to either validate it or I'm able to update it. We engage with systems like this in our private lives every day, and bringing those principles into the way that government is transforming and modernizing, I think should be standardized and almost such that it becomes mandatory that this is the way that good engagement looks and feels. So
it's another interesting thing you say when you talk about the 3 steps. Let's make sure they're the right 3 steps.
The right 3, for sure.
Let's make sure that they solve the right problems.
Yes.
I think that far too often we say, well, we're going to condense 30 steps into 3,
Sure.
and then the 3 steps are bad, right? And the other thing is that constituents and federal staff, they all exist in a world where these experiences already work.
Exist,
And
yes.
so the government doesn't have an excuse anymore to say, well, we're the government, we can't. And they actually have the power to do a lot more. And I think that a lot of agencies are really trying to challenge themselves around some of that.
Sure.
The one thing that I'll be the wet blanket on our discussion a little bit. And the one thing that I know agencies struggle with is a lot of the laws that are set up,
Right.
and it refers back to the Paperwork Reduction Act as a perfect example. Something that needs to be updated, that was built on a time when we had paper, right? Oh, if you want to survey your customers, you send a piece of paper out, and then everyone fills it out and they send it back. So they want to make sure. Now that we're in this digital world, surveying customers, it's much less of a burden, it's much less time consuming. And then the same with like computer matching laws. I mean, these things are, I think that's one of the big problems. I'm sure you ran into that as a CIO.
I did.
Where you were like,
Policy can constrain, improvements. And so, back to, you have two people sitting here that work at a software company telling you that like when we start with the business process, behind the business process is some policy. And even like, empowering OMB to think about the legislation or the regulation and those things that we don't hamstring, a government agency to be able to proactively serve its constituents.
And I think that's got to come from both the White House, the administration, but also from industry. I mean, I think Congress doesn't hear enough from industry about, hey, we want to serve. We're part of this solution, but until you remove this obstacle, that's a whole path I know we can go down.
Think oftentimes
it's an excuse. You're gonna tell me that?
I was going to say oftentimes if you're like a really savvy leader, you can go kind of hunting for the answer that you want. And sometimes that answer is in a policy book that someone has misinterpreted, right? And so that's why you need to build the coalition of the willing, right?
Yeah.
Like you build it with your business leaders, you build it with your tech leaders, you build it with your executives, and you together try to figure out what you're trying to create.
So true.
And in fact, in A11, and you'll forgive me for nerding out, because I did spend a lot of time reading it. It's 1,000 pages. I didn't read all 1,000. But they do go through and say, hey, under the PRA, if you are observing someone filling out a form, that's not a PRA requirement. If you are, if you have a focus group of less than 10 people or 9 people or less, then it's not a PRA requirement. So to your point, there are ways to say, okay, how can we think about this differently? And I think that's a great segue, because artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies are leading us down this path to think a little differently.
Yes.
And maybe Mia, start off, as agencies are trying to find the right use case for AI, where does the customer experience fit? And we know chatbots exist and people are excited about it, but what else are you starting to see?
Well, I've taken a glance at the use cases that have been published, and I do have a point of view. And I'll just say that, I see a lot of like new use cases, things that aren't about necessarily the things that government is already doing or has a solution for. And they're not necessarily thinking about, well, how do if I have a grants program where every year I get billions of dollars in money that I need to get out to businesses or to citizens, how do I leverage artificial intelligence to make that process more efficient, and how do I make it faster? Because AI can bring insights to life. There are predictions that can be made about grantees. It can inform them about other opportunities for them to apply for, and most importantly, then how does AI guide new staff that have just onboarded to process applications quickly and efficiently based on historical information. I think we're not thinking about things in that way. And so it's surprising to me when I look at the published use cases that I don't see use cases where they're like, we need to make this more efficient because then we can get all the money out of the door.
Yeah, I mean, and sort of further, if you think about what AI can do well, that we know, that AI can do well, it could write faster than us, right? It can analyze information faster than us. That doesn't mean it always writes the right thing the first time. Doesn't mean that the analysis is going to be what you need it to be. So I think that there's a sort of a disconnect with people thinking it's going to solve all problems, and that they're going to be sort of taking a backseat to AI. I think what we need to figure out is where is the actual middle here. So if I can do like doc generation, if I can do memo generation, something like that is really great. I still have to read the memo, right? I'm still going to give it to a senior leader, right? And it has to be right. So those are the things I think that we need to start having conversations around. Where do you find the efficiency? but then where do you have the human intervention to make sure that the thing is the thing you want to deliver?
Yeah, we have this statement that we make in Salesforce where, it's AI with human in the loop. And so the way our point of view on AI is simply put, it is AI in the flow of work. So in other words, we're not asking you to swivel chair to some other technology or some other screen in order to get an answer back to use in your business process. We're saying embedded within the platform, you can create these efficiencies using AI.
We got just about a couple minutes left,
Okay.
and I'd love to talk more about AI.
Yeah.
What you described is the shiny object syndrome, but you and I could probably talk an hour on that. But there are places agencies can go for help. There are ways agencies can find kindred spirits,
Yes.
to Michael's point about understanding that middle ground. Talk a little bit about what Salesforce is doing. Talk a little bit about how you all are helping to connect those people.
So since I've been at Salesforce, we have reimagined what it would be to have a community of practice for the federal community. And Michael and I are co-chairs of the Salesforce Federal Community of Practice. And really, we imagined it to be what we would have wanted when we were on the other side of the table, which is a place to learn what other government organizations are doing well, opportunities to connect and solve the same problem in a safe space with one another. And then the third piece is that what we've seen bubble out of this community is this opportunity to share code. So X agency may have developed a solution that is common across government, and there is an ability to now share that application or share that code with another agency that it may be 70 or 80% of the solution that they need. That's good government, right? And we're talking about sharing code government to government, right? With no cost to the government to do so. And so it is this community that we are trying to promote and to grow and to have it a place where people are actually seeing progress. I just want to give you one data point and why this community is so important. I joined Salesforce in October of 2021. There have been 13, and come October, 14 releases of new capability in the platform. Most times our government customers deploy and they never deploy again. They never update based on the latest capabilities. It's in this community where we're trying to make or to garner awareness about what is possible to reduce the number of RFIs and RFQs that go out for technology that they already may have.
Let's face it, people invest a lot of money in Salesforce, in their platform. This forum brings together what is happening that they want to mimic in their agencies. We bring the best folks to the table to share those stories. And we have Salesforce talent in those meetings as well, so people can leverage them and learn from them.
I think I really appreciate you all sharing that, because it's 3/4 of this is knowing what you don't know.
Yes.
And understanding, oh, this does exist. I can take advantage of it. I can, at no cost, improve my capabilities and see what other people have done. Because I think you're right. I think what we've seen over the years is agencies, that 80% solution is usually enough to get us going.
That's right.
And then we figure out that other 20%. Mia, Michael, I really appreciate our conversation today. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today. Let me thank our guests. Michael Hornsby is the Customer Success Director at Salesforce. Michael, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
And Mia Jordan is an industry advisor also with Salesforce. Mia, it's always great to see you again.
Good seeing you too.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.